Alright, good evening and welcome to QA Presents, a crash course of the IQA 2018-20 Rulebook. My name's Nat. I will get started in just a second. Hopefully everyone can find their way to the stream okay. So this one is a little bit different to webinars I've done in the past. We don't have any required attendance. You actually don't have to be here. If you're watching from wherever you are, thank you for joining me. If you're watching this delayed, thank you for joining me. And I hope you can learn some things today. We don't have any quizzes today either, which means hopefully no time of me filling blank space. And I'm watching the chat window, so if you have any questions, message me there. Hopefully you can hear me. That would be ideal. All right. So let's get started, shall we? All right. Rules, a crash course. Nope, that's not what I want to do. This window. Aha. All right. Cool. Hi, I'm Nat. I currently play for the Sydney City Serpents. I used to play for USyd. I'm also a former drop bear, current drop bear, and New South Wales state player. These are the pictures I used last time. Not much has changed since then, although I only played a couple of minutes at state because I did my shoulder. Full recovery from that, by the way. Thank you everyone who wanted to know. This is me. I've been on the QA gameplay committee for 2 years. I've been a head referee for about 4 or 5-ish. I ref netball before that, and I like to think that I help people out doing reffing things, and it's my intention here to help everyone out today, especially as we go into Vic Fantasy and also the other tournaments that are coming up across the year and starting up pretty soon. So we're going to cover the main changes today. So these are the rulebook itself, the pitch and boundaries and inbounding, interpositional interference and interpositional ball interference very quickly, third bludger interference, and then a bunch of other random things throughout the rest of the rulebook. So, the new and improved rulebook. It is a lot shorter. Now, 90 pages doesn't sound short until you realize that it used to be 172. As you're scrolling through, you'll notice there's a really thick appendix section at the back. There's a lot of different appendices, and they're really all very useful. It has been simplified a lot because they've taken out a lot of the sub-clauses in really specific situations, and the rulebook now reads a lot more as what is actually written there is how you should be interpreting the rule. It's in a lot easier format to read. I think there's a lot less jargon and it contradicts itself less. The things flow logically, and all around I want to give a congrats to the rules team in the US and the IQA because you get a thumbs up from me, so good job. All right, on that note, please read the rulebook. I'm taking you through things today because I think that's helpful, but there's really nothing better than reading it yourself. Here's Damo. You'll know Damo from snitching things. And Damo wanted to read the rulebook because I yelled at him to, and then he did. So, yay Damo, yay everyone else. Read the rulebook because you should. There's a link in the description, or I post it every time I mention anything. Or it's on the IQA new website. So the rulebook itself, these are the new sections. Basically, if you're looking for something in the old sections, it's more or less where it has. The only thing that's moved really is subs, and also all the appendices have been fleshed out a little bit. Everything else is basically where it always has been. We've also got a proper definitions sheet now, which covers more or less everything. We've got a list of fouls by type, which looks correct. So if you really just want to study up what color card or what foul goes with what, you can. There's an appendix at the back. Appendix C is the longest. It's the referee signals, and there's actually some really fun referee signals in there. Like the one for inbound procedure error is like you're mimicking a football throw-in. I like that. And there's a bunch of other stuff in there as well. The changelog as well is ordered by significance. So if you really want to know what the key changes are from what you might be used to playing Quidditch, you can go look in the changelog, and the first section there is stuff that comes up all the time. And then the next section is stuff that will probably come up most games, and then the other finicky things that you would really only know if you go looking for it or if you watch all my videos. So let's start with the one that's apparently the most controversial, and I have no idea why, but it is. So that would be boundaries. Namely, we have an actual boundary now. Hooray! I'm a big fan of this. I've always hated the soft boundary being, oh, look, stay inside if you can, but if you go out, it's okay. And if you kind of go out, definitely don't go out past the next line. So now we just have one major boundary here. It's just the boundary. There's no soft boundary. There's no hard boundary anymore. And once you are out, you are out. Which I'll talk about what that means in a second. You're also supposed to mark out a player area around that. And this kind of just functions as a spectators should not be wandering through this area. Officials shouldn't be in that area unless they're officiating that game. It's just an exclusion zone to make sure everyone's safe. It also means we can get rid of the fouls for endangering spectators, which I hated. So everyone who was at Quaffle last year, I made everyone move back really far away from the field. So it's a similar sort of thing. If you can mark it, please do. If you can't, just make sure everyone who sets up near the field is really far away. These are the dimensions. The pitch itself is 60 by 33. The other thing I'll point out here as well is that the ball marks have moved. So they're all evenly spaced from each other now instead of being the two middle ones being really tight together. And each one is 5.5 meters apart from each other. So you can do the math on where those go. Yeah. This is where the rest of everything else sets up as well. So inside that exclusion zone, there's this designated sub area. You do need to sub in and out of the sub area now, so you can't run around the back to come in from the other side. You need to keep all your other gear and stuff in the team bench. So extra brooms and water and stuff like that. So that should all be off the field. The scorekeeper should be outside of our exclusion zone as well, but right next to it. And the penalty area is the other thing that's in that zone. So again, get used to the idea that there's space here for playing, and everyone else who isn't involved directly in playing should not be there. I'll just point out now, while we've got the map as well, the fourth ball mark, the one furthest away from the scorekeeper, is also now the point for the third snitch handicap. So snitch handicaps are you always need to stay between the keeper's own lines. Then we go to staying 1 meter either side of the midline, I think. Then it's one hand, and then it's you've got to stay within 1 meter of this point. And the point is now the ball mark on the other side. So they recommend if you are marking out a field, at least mark that ball mark, because that'll help out the snitch and the seekers a lot. So if we now have a boundary, we now have throw-ins, because the ball can now actually be out. So the first thing to worry about here is when is a ball or a person out. So a person's out if they are touching the ground out of bounds, and you're not in again until you are only touching ground inbounds. So if you jump from outside and land back in, you're not in play until you've touched the ground again. If you are running out and you do a sick jump, manage to catch the ball and throw it back in before you land, that's fine. You were never out because you never touched the ground out of bounds. Things that make a ball out. So if you're holding a ball and you are out of bounds, then that ball is considered out of bounds. If the ball touches anything out of bounds except for a player who's in play, that ball is considered out of bounds. The other thing to keep in mind here is that on the line is considered out. So just be aware of that if you're touching any part of the line, if you have a marked line, or where the line would be if you've got cones, on the line is out. So I've stolen some pictures from Quidditch UK here because they went and made some. So thanks Quidditch UK for these. So that's just, really clear. On the line is out, inside is in, outside is out. Pretty straightforward. And again, summary page here. So the ball, if it's in the air, it's in. If it's in the air on the pitch side, it's in. If it touches anything outside, it's out. However, if the thing it touches is a person who's in play, if it's a quaffle, it's considered out. If it's a bludger, the ball is considered in. That said, though, we'll get to this in a second, you can't throw a ball at someone who's out and intentionally, and the person who's out, if they're retrieving a ball, is immune. So the only time this counts is really to see what happens to the deflection of that ball. I wouldn't really worry about it too much because this isn't really going to happen. Cheeky side note though, if you throw a bludger at someone going to get a ball who isn't out yet, they can still get beat. But we'll get to that in a second. So, ball is out. We've decided that a ball is out. Who gets the ball? The person who gets the ball is termed the inbounding player. Now, the referee will designate who the inbounding player is, whether that's the head referee, usually if it's a quaffle, or an assistant referee. So assistant referees, please, 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 more importantly than usual, please be watching your boundaries because you need to tell someone who to go get the ball. When you go to choose who your inbounding player is, they need to A, not be knocked out, B, they need to not already be holding a ball. So if you have a ball, you can't go get another one. C, able to possess that ball. That one's pretty obvious. And D, or not already be the inbounding player for another ball. So if you have two bludgers that go out pretty close to each other on one sideline, you need to deal with those in order. So the one that went out first, designate an inbounding player, and then designate the second one to an inbounding player. And you can't designate the same person to go get both balls because they would already be the inbounding player for the other ball. Hopefully that makes sense. It's pretty common sensey, really, if give the ball to the person. But which person? Well, all right, so for bludgers, this is what it's always been. The inbounding player is the nearest eligible beater. So it doesn't matter who threw the ball. It doesn't matter who it deflects off. It doesn't matter if it beat someone on the way through. The nearest eligible beater at the time the bludger becomes out is the inbounding player. But this is what I was saying before. So if they become ineligible, for example, if they get beat before they exit the pitch, the next nearest eligible beater becomes the inbounding player. If there's no one around, or you can also decline to pick up a bludger if that would be strategic to you. An official just needs to go get it and put it 2 meters inside the inbounding point. Okay, so that bit hasn't really changed. It's just got whoever the nearest beater is. For a quaffle though, and again, it hasn't really changed. If a keeper defends a shot and are the last person to touch it before it goes out, they are the inbounding player. So that has to just be a shot, right? They can't just throw the ball out or let it trickle over the edge. It needs to be them defending a shot and that deflects the ball out. Otherwise, it is always the nearest eligible quaffle player on the team who did not last touch the quaffle. So if I make a pass and it misses and it goes out, the other team gets the ball. If I make a pass, it hits an opponent and it goes out, I get the ball back. Right, whoever did not last touch it gets the ball again, except for that keeper exception. Now, for chasers, they're considered immune from the moment they are designated an inbounding player until they get back on pitch. So beaters can still get beat before they exit. Chasers are immune once they are the inbounding player. And I think that has to do with delay of game and that sort of thing. So making sure that the play continues as we want it to. Now, the one overall exception on all of that is if the ball is possessed at the time it goes out, it always turns over to the opponent. So, as we'll see in a second, it's now perfectly legal to force someone out over the boundary. So, if you're holding a ball, you get tackled out, the ball was in your possession, the opponent will get that ball. So, even if that's a bludger, it will still turn over. Cool. So, we know whose ball it is and we know who needs to go get the ball. Where do they go and what do they do? So for a quaffle, it's really easy. It's where the quaffle crosses the boundary line. So it doesn't matter where it ends up. The chaser or keeper needs to bring the quaffle back to where it crosses, which is what we're showing here. So if we've got a nice ball that goes off to that side, gets picked up over this way, they need to bring it back to this point. For a beater, they need to run perpendicularly to the boundary line to enter as close as they can to where they pick up the ball. Now, I have it on good authority that this is hard to remember to do. So beaters, please be aware, try and make it back to the field as soon as possible. Rationale behind this, I'm guessing, is you're immune during this time because you're out of bounds. So make sure that you get back to play basically as soon as possible. You can't be running up and down the boundary being safe. So get back to the boundary and be ready to pass or enter the play. Because you have 5 seconds. So once you've got the ball and once you get to the inbounding point, an official needs to count down 5 seconds for you. In that 5 seconds, you are immune because you're still out of bounds. So the official will start counting down and the ball must be inbounds before they start saying 0. So start at 5, get to 0, something needs to have happened by 0. Your options are 1, throw the ball. Easy enough. You can pass. You can try for a shot, but the quaffle will be unscorable. So if it goes through the hoop off you, that's not legal. And same goes for a bludger, it's dead. So any ball you make live from the sideline is not what we generally consider a live ball. It needs to go through other processes before it can be considered live. Your other option is what it's always been, and that's just carry the ball in. And there's a restriction on that no opponent can physically stop you from entering the pitch. They need to give you some space to get in. They can shepherd you along the sideline, I guess, but they need to actually let you physically on field first. And the penalty for not letting someone in is a back to hoops. Cool, so just got another little picture there. All right, so what I alluded to a second ago, can I force people out of bounds? Finally, yes, absolutely you can. It's in the rule book, everything's legal, yay. Once you're out of bounds, you're required to stop contact as quick as is safe to do so. There's no penalty for being forced out of bounds, but because you were out of bounds and the ball was in, if there's a ball in your possession at that time, it will be turned over. So there's no penalty, but it's a turnover. Can I go out of bounds for fun or to get a better position or anything like that? No. So you need to be on pitch as reasonably as practical for as long as practical. If you're out for a small time accidentally, you won't be penalised, but your ball will be turned over. So if you're running down the sideline and you happen to touch the sideline, you're not going to be penalised just for making like one side misstep. But if you are out, then your ball needs to get turned over. It's back to hoops if you intentionally or egregiously go out of bounds. So again, the referee will call boundary. We'll see how annoying that is. I'm happy to accept out or throw in as well. At least that's what I'm going to be doing. But should always be indicating the inbounding player. So you only need to stop play for a quaffle if retrieval will unnecessarily delay the game. So if it rolls down the hill and into a car park. There's actually no clause allowing that for a bludger, but that's stupid. So if your bludger rolls off field and down a hill and into a car park, stop play, because, yeah. If that needs to be an official amendment, I will strongly recommend to QA that they make that an official amendment. Okay, and finally, we've got a blue card if you propel a ball with the intent of sending any ball out of bounds. So this closes a loophole that in Australia, at least, we never realised existed. So it was always illegal to throw a ball out of bounds, but if you use your ball to throw a ball at another ball, technically that was never illegal, but it is now. So it's also now a blue card. That's always been a contentious one over whether it's a blue or a yellow. So propelling a ball with the intent of sending it out of boundaries is now blue. And intentionally or ignoring a boundary call is a yellow card, as are all fouls that involve you disrespecting officials. Okay. So in summary, for a bludger, the person who gets the ball is the nearest eligible player. They need to move to the nearest point on the sideline where they pick up the ball, which becomes the inbounding point for them. For a quaffle player, the nearest quaffle player whose team did not last touch the ball will get it, unless the keeper is saving a shot, and the inbounding point is where the ball exited. So if the ball is possessed when it goes out, it will always get turned over. The inbounding player has 5 seconds to throw or carry the ball in, which will be counted down by a referee, and you can force people out. You or the ball is out, more or less, if it touches something that is out or touches the line. All right, so that's everything balls and boundaries. So we've got a question here about touching the side of the pitch when you're a seeker. So if the Snitch, for example, pushes you out of bounds, I'll check that, but I'm going to say off the top of my head that that's not your fault. And as long as you regain your footing and get yourself back in play as soon as possible, that should be okay. Something's triggering in my head about seekers need to stay not too close to the sideline anyway. Again, I will check that later and get back to you, but that's what I would think is sensible. And the great thing about the new rulebook is it's updated a lot of the stuff that we played by anyway, to like actually make it the way we play it, which is awesome, and also it makes a lot of sense. So generally you can kind of use your intuition on that one. We have another question. If a beater holding a bludger steps out of boundary and the opposing team has control, where does it go? So first rule is if you step out, the ball is out. Second rule is if it's in possession, it goes to the other team. In that case, where there's no eligible player available, I'm going to go with it's going to be play on, or maybe you have to put the ball down, possibly. I have a quick look on that one because I know where it is. Yeah, I'm going to go with the person who's holding it is the inbounding player, because it would fall under if there's no eligible beaters near the point and no one coming to get it. Yeah, I'm going to say essentially play on, but check first. So make them drop it, check that the other team does have control, and then say, okay, it's your ball, go for it. All right. Let's just give that a minute, another few seconds to catch up, because there's a quick time lag, and then we will move on. All right, moving on. That's 20 minutes. Okay, let's see how we go. Aiming for an hour here, by the way. There's a lot of slides, but the last ones I just wanted to say a point or two and move on. They won't take as long as these. These are the big fundamental ones that affect how we actually play. All right, drives, pace of game, and resetting. All right, so this one takes a little bit of setting up to get to, so bear with me. There's a little bit of new terminology here, but again, it makes sense, and once you get used to it, it's really easy to officiate, because you're always going to be watching the midline, and if the ball trickles over the midline, you know what to do. So let's move on. What is a drive? All right, a drive starts for a team when they gain possession of the quaffle. So that's either during their opponent's drive, which ends their opponent's drive, at the start of a period, so literally the first thing in the middle of the game, or after a good goal and makes the quaffle live. So that is how a drive starts. So think of it as someone's got the ball coming up the field. So it's not when you run backwards and then go back forwards. That's still the same drive from the first time, right? It's when you get the quaffle and when you go. And your drive ends when the opponent gets possession of the quaffle, which starts their next drive, when a period ends, so when it's the end of regulation time or overtime or anything like that, or when a goal is scored. Okay, so this is really fundamental because it's the kind of the point that resets our reset system, I guess. So make sure you kind of just keeping a good firm grasp on quaffle, start, go. All right. Now, delay of game. So delay of game is an attempt to stop or significantly impede the quaffle game from continuing. So that hasn't changed from the previous rulebook, but they have cleaned up this whole section in terms of what's allowed, what's not allowed. And again, you should always be reading this as read what is actually written there. Try not to think too much of, oh, but what about in this case? Because it's all worded to be a bit more all-encompassing. So guidelines. You always need to be advancing the quaffle at least a normal walking pace up to the midline. Once you get to the midline, you've got a bit more fair game to do whatever you want. You can slow it down, you can go sideways, but up until the point you cross the midline, you need to be at a normal walking pace. And if you do take a diagonal up there, it needs to vectorially be a normal walking pace in a forwards manner. So basically, get the quaffle, get past the midline. As long as you've got that in mind, you should be fine. However, if the quaffle carrier is blocked by the defender, they may temporarily delay this, but still need to clearly find a way to bypass them. And we actually have a definition here for blocked. So blocked refers to if there's an opposing chaser or keeper within 2 meters, or a beater with a bludger within 4 meters. So that doesn't mean you can now stop. If there's a beater in front of you with 4 meters away, you do need to do your best to get around them or pass or something like that to make sure that you're still going forward. But there is actually a distance set in there as to what we're talking about. There's also a new clause here called stalling, which is one I really like because this is kind of the way I always taught delay of game anyway. So on each drive, the quaffle players on the offensive team must act with the overall intention to score. They may not act with the overall primary intention to waste time for any reason. The problem with that, of course, is that as referees, we don't know what their intention is. So when this is blatantly obvious, it'll be blatantly obvious and you can penalize them for it. So that's the sort of thing where they're standing there passing the ball to each other on an open hoop, right? Or you've gone around in circles 6 times around the hoops and they still haven't attempted to, haven't looked like they were going to try and score. Thankfully, it's not really a problem here in Australia, but I know it is in other places. So let's keep on not being a legal team, but keep in mind you need to be acting with the overall intent to score on your drive. So penalties on delay of game. Ref may issue a warning. You can issue multiple warnings throughout a game as is appropriate, and you do not need to be warned before a foul. So it used to be a thing where people got really antsy if you carded them for delay of game without a warning. Properly codified in the rulebook, you don't have to do that. Yeah, issue a warning if you want, which they need to respond immediately to, or just give them a blue card and a turnover. So blue card on that one. Cool. All right. Which brings us to resetting the quaffle. So, again, bear with me for a second as we go through terminology, and then we'll get to what's actually illegal or legal about this in a second. So, a reset is carrying or propelling the quaffle backwards over a restrictor line for any reason. So, our two restrictor lines are the midline and your defensive keeper zone line. So let's say you get the quaffle, the other team's just scored, right? You have an obligation to get up past the midline, and this is why. Because if you go back over the midline for any reason, or back over the keeper zone line for any reason, that counts as a reset. Okay? On that note, if the ball is deflected and it goes back over one of the restrictor lines, that's fine. If you're physically forced over the restrictor line, that's fine. That's not going to count as a reset for you. If the quaffle gets stripped from you and it goes over the restrictor line, that's fine. But you do need to get forward again as soon as you recover the quaffle. Okay, and the one other exception to this is if immediately upon initiating a drive, the player who picks up the quaffle crosses either or both without it being a reset. So let's say we had some play happening up around here, there's an intercept, they pick up the ball and run backwards just on instinct, right? That's not going to count as a reset if it's the literal first thing they do when picking up the ball. So you can't take a few steps forward, see a bludger, and then retreat back, because that will count as a reset. Okay? If you happen to cross both lines in one, that's just one reset. So there's no, if we're up here and we do a pass back, you don't get pings for that being two. And the referee here needs to be calling reset used. Speaking to my referee folks here, this is really for your benefit more as much as anyone else's, because it'll help you remember that, yeah, they have used their reset. There's a hand signal for this, which is just arm straight out with your palm down to the side. Yep, and as I alluded to earlier, this one's actually pretty easy to keep track of because you'll be watching the midline and just ready for if it goes back over. ARs as well, if you are on the defensive side now and there's no bludger play happening near you, you can keep an eye on the lines as well to help out the head ref here. But always be watching the bludgers, of course. All right, so what is illegal then? Short answer, resetting more than once on a single drive. So you're allowed one. You're allowed to pass the ball back to your hoops to safety once on a drive. And remember, your drives reset either when the opponent gets the ball, or you get scored on, or you score, or like the period ends. Okay, so you can cross these reset lines once. If you do it more than once on a drive, then that's a illegal reset. There's no card for that. It's just a quaffle turnover. The second way you can have an illegal reset on this is if you propel the quaffle back across the restrictor line without attempting to pass to an eligible receiver or to score. So this flows on from what the previous illegal reset rule was. It hasn't changed. So if you pass back to someone who's eligible when the quaffle arrives, that's fine. However, it does still count as your one reset. Okay, so you can't pass it back infinite number of times. You can only pass it back once. But if you do pass it back, you're fine. Again, eligibility is at the time of arrival of the quaffle. So if you're running back beat and you touch on and turn around and there's a quaffle there, you're fine. Okay. And as I said, there's no card. It's just a turnover. You should stop play on an illegal reset unless it's obviously going to be the other team's quaffle, in which case you can play on. All right. So I'll pause there if you have any other questions. I've just noticed Michael's joined the chat. Thank you for helping answer people's questions on that. I've gotten through most of them. We had a point about the beta thing that if there's a turnover and the other team has possession, it's put out their hoops. I haven't actually seen that existing anymore. It might. But I think in the case where you've got the sideline, we just play on. Cool. So quick pause. Any other questions before we keep moving on? I meant to get some music to play in the background of these bits, but all the royalty-free music is quite funny, which probably helps, really. No, I'm not going to sing. All right, let's keep moving forward. Interposition right of way. So this is one of those sections which we've sort of always played with, or rather, there's now just an actual framework for what to do when this happens. I really don't anticipate it coming up that much. It's a bit confusing to get your head around though. So it's also a section I kind of hate. So we'll see if it stays in Australia. But anyway, imposition right of way. So you want to think about this like is if you've ever been in a car accident. So if there's a collision, there's generally someone who's deemed at fault. And who is at fault in these Quidditch collisions depends on who they are and what they were doing at the time. So on the left there, we've got our chain of what's it called? Chain of priority. Chain of priority. So the highest priority person is a stationary player who has a ball. If they get run into by anyone else, it's everyone else's fault, not theirs. If next is a stationary chaser keeper without a ball, moving player with a ball, a stationary beater or seeker without a ball, and a moving player without a ball. So basically, if you've got a collision, look at who's at fault. If they were the same priority, that should generally a ref's call. It should be pretty obvious who's at fault there. If it's intentional, that overrules a priority. So if you run into someone who would normally be at a higher priority than you, but you do lower priority than you, but you do it intentionally, you're going to get penalized. Sorry, that was very convoluted. If you do it intentionally, you're at fault, is a short version. If there's no time to react and get out of the way there's no foul unless you deliberately acted so that you were unaware, like you closed your eyes or you turned away, or you should have known, then you can still get penalized for this. Generally, it's just a back to hoops. For a minor one, yellow card if it's illegal, and red if violent or egregious. So I just wanted to point that one out because it is brand new. So if you're coming across it and you're like, I don't know what this is, that's what it is. Interpositional ball interactions is a bigger one, in my opinion. Again, I'm also a beater, so I'm not a big fan of this, but so we'll see how it goes. As always, players have always been forbidden from possessing, touching, kicking, throwing, or otherwise using a ball not associated with their position. So they've just expanded this bit to take into account what happens when you get in the way of a ball, or you happen to be in the way of a ball, or you don't get out of the way of a ball. They've just expanded this a little bit. So for beaters and seekers who cannot play a quaffle, you need to take any and all reasonable actions to avoid the propelled quaffle. So there's 3 different levels of foul here. So there's a minor failure to avoid, which is where if you attempt to get out of the way and fail, but overall play is not affected. So you see the ball coming at you, you try and dodge it, you're unsuccessful at that, but then the quaffle just kind of bounces away. That's a minor failure. If you intentionally move into or remain in the path of a quaffle, it is, however, an interposition ball interference. Try saying that 10 times. And if your unintentional failure to avoid leads in a goal, that needs to be penalized. I've got the wrong wording there. If you block a score, basically, you need to be penalized for that, because if not for you, there would have been a goal. So there's just kind of a little bit of leeway around that. You can, however, still throw your bludger at a quaffle. That's perfectly fine. You can't deflect it in your hand, but you can still throw it at it. If you're unaware, you're not penalized. If you had no time to avoid it, you're not penalized. But in general, try and get out of the quaffle best you can. For chasers and keepers, and so we're now talking about bludgers, you are explicitly allowed to let a bludger hit you or intentionally get in the way of a live opponent's bludger. So if you see a bludger coming in at your seeker and you want to do a hero dive to block that bludger, go for it. Right? It can bounce off any part of your body at any angle, but you cannot propel the bludger with any part of your body. So if you kind of do the cheeky turn thing and like deflect the bludger way off in the other direction, you've propelled that, right? So that's going to be illegal for you. But you can perfectly get in the way of it. That's perfectly fine. And of course, you can deflect a bludger coming in at you with a held quaffle, or you can throw a quaffle at a live bludger. So just pointing out here, that means not a dead bludger. So a dead bludger is basically one on the ground or one in someone's hand that hasn't been made live and been thrown. So yeah, you can't help your beaters recover the bludgers in that sense, but you can throw your quaffle or deflect one that's coming at you. And penalty for swatting, so propelling the ball, as mentioned above, is a blue card. So a quick summary there as we go through the penalties, and these are all listed out. So it's a back to hoops if you have a minor failure, and again, that's where you attempt to get out of the way but fail. It's a turnover if it's incidental but generally unintentional. They essentially just get the ball back that you kind of stop them from getting. It's a blue card if you fail to avoid propelled quaffle. It's a blue card if you illegally swat a bludger. It's a yellow card if you illegally block a propelled quaffle from scoring. And note the unintentionally on that, because if you do it intentionally, that's a red card. So anyone who comes from football know if you deliberately do a handball like in the box, right, you're going to get a red card out of that. Similar kind of thing here. If not for you, there would have been a score, and therefore it's a pretty serious penalty. Great. Okay. So one question there. Can you attempt to get in the way of a beater's beat as a chaser before the ball is live? Yeah, I don't see why reason not to. On that, I'm pretty sure. You'd have to be pretty good to guess where it's going, but should be fine, I think, unless I'm completely wrong on that. But again, still getting used to the rulebook myself. So again, thank you, Michael, for being here to help out on that. Tell me if I'm wrong. I do not mind at all. That's 7. I'm going to move on. Let Michael answer that, just to check that I'm not giving out wrong information, as I probably am the whole thing. All right, third bludger interference. So this is one real quite short clause that simplifies a whole bunch of rules from previously. So what we're talking about, of course, is what used to be known as guarding. So guarding as a phrase has gone completely away from the it's completely out of the rulebook. It doesn't exist anymore. And instead, we now have third bludger interference, and it's about 3 lines long, the whole section, once you've established what the third bludger is. So the third bludger is when one team has possession of 2 bludgers and the remaining bludger is unpossessed and dead. The free dead bludger becomes the third bludger. So this is what it's always been, right? So it's only the third bludger, and everything we talk about in a second referring to the third bludger only comes into play if the other team has 2 bludgers in their possession. Okay. Otherwise, yes, you have 3 bludgers, but there is no third bludger. Now, the thing to keep in mind here is that this ball remains the third bludger until one of these things happen. Either the possessing team makes a reasonable beat attempt, the possessing team loses a bludger directly due to the actions of an opponent, or the team without a bludger gains possession of any bludger. So, let's unpack that. So, team has 2 bludgers, the other team has no bludgers. That third bludger is the third bludger unless the team makes a reasonable beat attempt. So, reasonable needs to be at an eligible target. So, if you throw it at someone who's immune or a keeper who's immune, then this clause doesn't activate, and the third bludger is still the third bludger. If you relinquish it over towards their hoops, that's not a reasonable beat attempt. The third bludger remains the third bludger. And also we've got the word reasonable in there. And reasonable is a really nice word because it means what it is, right? If you throw at someone from cross field and you miss by a literal mile, which is hard on a field, you're going to get pinged for that, right? Because it's not a reasonable beat attempt. And the third bludger is going to still be the third bludger. If you miss by a little bit or something gets in the way or it was a bit of a risky shot and you tried, but obviously it was obvious what you were trying to do, right? A referee should see that and you have made a reasonable beat attempt and therefore the third bludger is not the third bludger anymore. And the last 2 clauses here have to do with the other team. So if you lose a bludger because you get tackled, then the third bludger is no longer the third bludger. You can't just drop it though, because the only thing you can do is throw it at a reasonable beat target. And finally, if the other team gains possession of any bludger, so even if you do throw it and it's not a reasonable beat attempt because you forget or whatever, once the other team has a bludger, the third bludger stops being the third bludger. Okay, so what does the third bludger mean, or why is it important? Okay, and it's similar to what it's always been, right? Third bludger interference is when a player on the possessing team takes possession of or in any way attempts to move the third bludger. So you can't pick it up, you can't move it, you can't do anything with it, you just need to leave it there. Okay, and you also cannot prevent or delay the other team from getting to the third bludger by continually or intentionally moving into their path. So again, similar to what's been, but kind of just real obvious of you need to let them get it, pretty much. And the penalty on this is a back to hoops and a double bludger turnover. So one bludger because they were prevented from getting the third bludger. So you should always try when you do your turnovers to make one you turn over the third bludger. Sometimes that's not going to work out, but I'm going to say nearly always it will. And the team that formerly had control is also going to lose a bludger as a penalty. So back to hoops and a double bludger turnover. If you have good confident ARs, you should be able to do that on your own. If you don't, you might need to stop play or get the head referee to stop play. So see how we go. So on that, a few notes on immunity that go along with this. So you can call immunity, as always, when there is a third bludger. The beater on team with no bludgers may raise their hand above their shoulder with their fist closed. If you have a minor invalid immunity claim, that's a back to hoops foul. So that's if the ball was still in the air, or if you didn't realize, or if two people on your team claim it and one of you doesn't put it down in time. I'm pretty sure. You are not immune if the bludger was live before immunity was claimed. And so again, your immunity is only claimed once you get your fist above your shoulder. So we don't have this the prior natural motion clause on calling immunity. We do have it on when you attempt to beat someone while they're immune. So if you begin motion before the immune beater loses their immunity, they cannot be knocked out by this attempt. So basically, wait for them to have possession of the ball, or when the third bludger changes, and then try and beat them. Okay, and again, possession is sole and complete control. So you still need to proceed directly to the ball, but you can approach it from any direction. So if there's a beater nearby and you want to come in and go for a kick, you can go from whatever side you want, but you do need to be proceeding directly at the third bludger if you've got immunity. And you lose your immunity when you get possession of the ball or the status of the third bludger changes. So if the other team legally throws their ball at a beat target, that's no longer the third bludger. You are no longer immune and you need to put your hand down. Okay. So again, just reiterating what's in the comments here. The really, really big change on this is that you can no longer throw a ball back to your opponent's hoops and relinquish the ball in that manner. You have to, the only thing you can do as a team with control to do something about the third bludger is throw your ball at an eligible target. If they're way down the other end and you want to be nice and give a ball back, like, I wouldn't penalize that if it's obvious what you're doing is in good faith. But you can also just aim at someone when you do that to help out. Cool. All right, so I don't have the foul on that. Oh, yes, I do. So again, the third bludger, the only foul here is back to hoops and double bludger turnover if you interfere with the third bludger. So there's no foul for throwing your ball in the wrong direction. You just have to remember not to pick up the third one because that's where it becomes a foul. And if you do happen to pick up the third one, well, you've already thrown yours and you're going to get one more turned over and we're just going to go on from there. So it's a lot simpler. I think I like this change. It's a bit neater, just in terms of how to think about this. As long as you remember, the only thing you can do is throw at a target. All right. I think we've covered everything with questions here. All right, so we're going to fly through these pretty quickly. These are just a couple of other things that have come up that are new or that I expect to come up a lot or that are just kind of funny because Australia. Just mention what the QA amendments are. So if you're listening in internationally, you can ignore this section. Please check with your local league about what your amendments, if any, are to the rulebook that you're playing under. The first one is just you're allowed to leave if you check with the head referee. Secondly, technically according to the rulebook, you're not allowed to play with wood anymore. QA's overruled that. Because most of the wood brooms here seem to be safer than the plastic ones, at least. As always, you need to have your broom cleared, though, in your equipment check. Mouth guards are not compulsory, so don't freak out about that. Strongly recommend wearing one. I started for World Cup last year, and I'll generally always play with it just because it makes me feel a bit safer about my teeth. If you have a jersey that has a symbol or a number that's greater than 99 on it, you can still wear it this year in Australia. But when you're doing new jersey orders with your clubs or other bodies, make sure that you're ordering ones with just the numbers from 0 to 99. Rip me and everyone else who has a letter number. It's very sad. And you can also wear glasses made of real glass. Okay, snitches. So, like I mentioned right at the start, the third handicap point is now the ball mark furthest from the scorekeeper. Not a big deal. It's basically the same place anyway. Just stay on that side of the field. I'll just reiterate, always stay between the keeper's own lines. This is important, more important now because the field has been condensed a little bit. So you need to not be behind the keeper's own lines just because that's unfair to your other team seekers. This bit's new. So during a stoppage, the snitch runner may wander off wherever they want. However, they need to return to roughly where they were before play restarts again. So previously, most seekers would just walk to the other side of the field and then make the seekers chase them when play restarts. You now need to start from the same point that you were, but you are considered down after each stoppage. So snitch referee, anytime the snitch is down, will be counting down from 3 seconds, and they will do this after any stoppage. So any brooms down, give the snitch a 3-second head start. And I'll just mention this one as well. This isn't new. The snitch is considered down from the moment that the clothing needs adjusting, because it's askew. All right, so they should be considered down from that point, unless the seeker's pulling the tail and contacts no other clothing, and the only reason the pants are askew is because you've got a grip on the tail and it's trying to detach. It's the only exception to that. Otherwise, if your shorts are askew, they're considered down. Yeah, I know about the glasses. I didn't write the amendments, even though I should have. All right. Speaking captains. Speaking captains may no longer enter the pitch unless play is stopped. I think I'm the only one that did this anyway, that I saw. But you now need to stay on the sideline unless it's a stoppage. Talk to your ARs on that side or the head referee if you want. There's just a section in there about individual players can speak on their own behalf. So I like to tell people that no one can talk to the referee unless you're the speaking captain. Look, it's a good thing for you referees, but you are allowed to talk as a person. But it's only the speaking captain who can speak on behalf of the team. So things like forfeits, things like determining who goes off in a card situation or that sort of thing. And there's also recognition of team staff in the thing in the rulebook about who's allowed to be in the box and when at what times. Team staff now exist. All right, timeouts. This one was pointed out to me by someone who read my thread because I didn't notice this at all when I first read it, and I think it's kind of cool. So there's now two types of timeout. The second one there actually is what it's always been. So when the keeper has possession of the quaffle in their own defensive zone when they have immunity before the 17-minute mark. So you've got the quaffle, either you've just been scored on or it's the start of your drive. In the defensive zone, you can call a timeout. The other time you can call a timeout is during any stoppage. So this includes after the 17-minute mark, if the snitch is on field. If there's a stoppage for some other reason, whether that's an injury or the ref's adjudicating a foul or anything like that, you can request a timeout then. You still only get one timeout, at least I'm pretty sure. I would have noticed that, if not. But you can call it during a stoppage later on if you so desire. Reason you can't call it not in a stoppage would basically be because it would mess up the whole Seeker game. It'd be very annoying playing Snitch on pitch and for no apparent reason on the other side, the other team calls a timeout just as you're about to catch. So that's why that's been a thing. But now in a stoppage, you can also call a timeout. It's also now a blue card. The last rulebook we played under, it was yellow. So Miles and everyone else who got double yellow carded out on illegal timeouts and other rules, rejoice. There's also a semblance for what you're meant to do to get people back on their brooms, and there's also a actual written piece for if you're not mounted at the restart whistle, you are dismounted and you need to go back to touch hoops, which again is what everyone did anyway, so it's great that it's actually written out there now. And you're meant to blow your whistle 45 seconds in, and try and be as quick, reasonable as you can, or 1 minute. I never time a minute. My timekeepers usually forget. So roughly know how long a minute is and be ready to get the game moving again. Dislodged hoops. If a hoop's in the process of falling, the goal counts. A falling hoop is dislodged when the hoop loop touches the ground or comes to a temporary rest in a non-upright position. So I like this because it's actually codified, when is a hoop down. If it's not upright and it's stopped falling, it's considered down. So upright, I'm interpreting as straight up and down, like 90 degrees to the ground, which I'm hoping is how everyone else will. If it's falling and it's come to rest, not in that position, it's down. It's also broken anytime the pole or the loop breaks or the loop detaches, so you can't have those sit goals where it hits the T junction, the loop pops off and the ball goes through, because it's already broken. That is not counted by the falling clause above because broken has a different meaning here to falling. And just one other thing to be aware of, don't reset your opponent's hoops while you're the offensive team. So once the hoop is down, that's important. The defense knows that hoop's down, so that's going to adjust how their gameplay is. If you sneak in and put the hoop back up, that's just kind of being a dick to them. So don't do that, or you get a blue card. One other thing on closely timed plays. So you should always do your best to know as a referee what happens in which order. Talk to your referees, talk to any your scorekeepers and timekeepers are also officials. They might have an idea on goals and that sort of thing. If you absolutely cannot determine the order of events, if a foul occurs at the same time as a catch and that foul would overrule the catch has to be disallowed. And if a goal and a catch occur simultaneously, both scores are counted. So if you've got a catch and a goal at the same time, you count both and then look at what the score is. That should tell you what happens if you go to overtime or not. If it's second overtime and you want to know who wins, the catch gets the win, because arguably catching in second overtime is harder than scoring a goal. So I thought that was neat, just a little extra thing there. Playing while knocked out has been simplified a lot. Basically, if you interact with play, you get blue card. If you immediately release a ball, that's a natural motion violation. If it's a natural motion violation, it's a turnover. If it's unintentional, and it's yellow if it's intentional. If you make contact or continue contact once you beat, you get a yellow card. If you don't notice your knockout and play on unintentionally, it's a turnover if the ref has to stop play to tell you. If you go on to affect play, it's blue. And if it's contact, that's still a blue. So generally contact fouls are yellows. This is the only one I've found that's a blue if you have an unnoticed knockout that you play on. Because it should be the ref's prerogative to tell you as soon as that you are beat. It should also, of course, be yours. If you're ignoring being knocked out, though, that's a yellow card. And again, a reminder that you need to already be in contact with the ball for the natural motion clauses to kick in. So if the ball's in the air and you hit it, you get hit before you make contact, or whether that's a kick or a spot or anything like that, that's not going to be covered by natural motion, and you'll get pinged for propelling or playing a ball. Read the cards on that one, essentially. Alright, picks. Start from the start. So as always, it's illegal to pick a player of a different position unless they're a chaser or a keeper. It's now specifically illegal to extend a single point of body for your opponent to run into. So using Trish here, she's not doing a pick, but if this elbow was sticking out to the side, on the side where you're expecting the person to run into you, that's illegal because you can't leave a shoulder out for them to run into. There's a real common thing that a lot of people set their hand in front of them when they set a pick because they don't want people to run into them. That's fine because you've got a whole surface there. You just can't have your elbow being the point they're going to run into, or your shoulder or anything like that. So just make sure you're setting your body with enough space, or with so that it's not going to be dangerous for the person you're picking. However, if you initiate contact rather than you get run into, so if you see them coming at you, you set yourself and then you like launch into them, you've launched into them. So that's probably going to be a charge. And it will be penalized accordingly. However, this is the main change here. Your feet do not need to be set. So the clause about moving screens being illegal has now been removed. You don't need to set your feet. So when we talk about setting the pick, that's once you've put yourself in the position in the anticipated path. So you set that pick, your feet do not need to be perfectly stationary anymore. If you move directly at a pick, these are out of order, that's a charge, right? So if you move with force towards someone who's trying to pick you, you're charging them, which is generally illegal. There's a few extra clauses when neither player has a ball. So if you're doing an off-ball pick, namely that if you're setting the pick from behind, you need to give the picked player a step of room to stop, get out of the way, or change direction. And this has to do with the broader, behind contact clauses here. It's just trying to be safe in that regard. So just give them a little bit more space than you would if they do have a ball. If you're setting a pick on a moving player, you need to have enough time for them to stop, change direction. And that's determined by speed, not awareness. So ideally, when you pick someone, you don't want them to know you're there, but you need to give them a chance, if they did look around, to be able to get out of the way. So that's sort of how we get around the safety thing here. And again, you need to avoid charging the picking player with everything you possibly can if neither of you have a ball. So always be aware of your body and where you are, and go from there. All right, kicking a contested ball, everyone's favorite clause. The fundamentals here are: do not kick people. Duh. If you kick a ball that an opponent is touching with their hand, it is a dangerous kick. If they get out of the way of the kick, but it would have been illegal if they didn't, it's a dangerous kick. And if you move in too late and put yourself in danger of being kicked, there's no foul. So if you see them coming in to kick it and then you put your hand there quickly so that they probably would kick you, there's no foul because you put yourself in that danger too late. A dangerous kick, or if you do kick someone, is a yellow card, and if that's violent or egregious, it's a red. All right, hurdling, I just kind of wanted to laugh at, sorry, because there's a whole clause here about not being allowed to jump over people unless they're on the ground, in which case you should jump over people because it's a safe way to get around them. Charging. All right, charging has changed a little bit as well. It's a revision from a few rulebooks ago. It's illegal to charge an opponent who is not in sole and complete possession of a ball unless the charging player has a ball. So what that means now is you can charge someone if they have a ball. You don't need to try and wrap them unless you're a beater. So chasers and keepers are able to charge at a player who has a ball or charge a player if you have a ball. Beaters, though, you need to attempt to wrap the player. You can't just try and charge them straight off. As always, initiating a charge with a single point of contact is illegal, and it's illegal for a player's feet to completely leave the ground. Yeah, and again, read in conjunction with all the pick sections. You just got to be careful, basically. There's a few other things that have been cleaned up. The initial point of contact, which are the behind rules, have all been cleaned up nicely, and again, basically read how we always played. So that should all make sense. Stealing is no longer illegal if done over the shoulder, although if you make contact with the head or neck, that's still a head or neck contact, and it's going to be illegal. Helpless always reads how it always has. And the other things are the same essentially, except tackling has now been folded into the wrapping section because a tackle is just recognized as the final action of a wrap. So if you're looking for tackling, it's under wrapping. All right, there's a new type of foul, and that is a ejection. So ejections happen when someone gets a red card. So you get given a red card, that player gets ejected from the game, their substitute serves 2 minutes in the penalty box. However, you can just receive just an ejection, but only if these are the fouls that would get you a red card, but you've done them against a teammate. So if you spat on a teammate, you've gotten an altercation with a teammate, you've used abusive language at a teammate, you're going to get yourself ejected, but there isn't actually a red card associated with that, so your team can just replace you on the field. So the main difference there is that there's no penalty time served for these fouls. But again, the only time this comes up is if it's against a teammate, and I don't think this has ever happened in Australia, or at least no one's ever been carded for it, I'm aware of. So let's keep that streak. And this one I like because Australia, internal unsportsmanlike conduct is a clause. So if you swear at yourself and it's obvious that you're not trying to abuse, vilify, insult anyone, and it's not discriminatory or obscene or vulgar, you're not going to get carded for that. So if you scream bag of genitals, as my lovely housemate did once, at no one in particular, at yourself, you're not going to get carded for that. So we made it! Yay! Well done. Thank you everyone for joining me. So any other questions, pop them through. I hope that's been useful. Again, the first couple of sections are the big changes. The boundary and the throw-ins are the weirdest ones for you to get used to. But once you play through it a couple of times, you get used to it. It does make sense. It's just getting used to what you need to do and when, and a little bit of extra emphasis on the referees to be paying attention. Hint, hint. Especially if you're an AR. Yeah, if you have any other questions, pop them through on the chat or message me or comment on the thread or whatever you want to do. I'm stepping down from QA gameplay pretty soon. Last thing I'm probably going to do is update the quiz we made for ref certs last year, and then to the new Rulebook. And then I'll leave you in the capable hands of Nicola, the gameplay director, and the rest of the committee. I'll still be around, still be reffing. Always happy to watch you ref at a game if you want help, or if you want to give it a go, or if you just want to talk about a rule, that's also fine. Thank you all. I will catch you later. Have a lovely evening. If you're in Victoria, I'll see you on Sunday, so be nice to each other tomorrow. Take care.